All right, extern boot camp. Who's ready to learn? Yeah, all right, we're ready to learn. Heck yes. So, you want to be a front-end developer? Are you aware that that's what this class is about? So, I wonder what does that even mean. What's the front end? Like that? Front-end developers? Yes, the right side. That's the front end, right? So, to get even more help from Google Images, as helpful as that is, looks like from Google Images, the front-end developers make flat, pastel-colored things for desktops, laptops, and mobile devices, and the really cool front-end developers have little icons floating around those pastel-colored laptops, phones, and other mobile devices. Let's take a closer look at those little logos and shields. HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So what do those things have in common? What do they have in common with each other that they don't have in common with these? And no, the ones on the left are front-end languages, the ones on the right are back-end languages is not an acceptable answer. It's true, but why? What do HTML, CSS, and JavaScript have in common with each other that they do not have in common with Ruby, Python, .NET, PHP, and Java? Yeah. Holy smokes. They're the only things that these rascals understand without any help. That's right. Browsers know just what to do with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. They don't know what the cuss to do with Ruby, Python, .NET, PHP, and Java. So, one possible definition of the front end is that it's anything that web browsers can interpret without any plugins or extensions or anything else. The stuff that they understand natively. If you want a more technical definition, the front end refers to things that run on the client, while back end refers to things that run on the server. Since we're working on the web browser is the client. So, for our purposes, the client is the web browser. Oh, slow down there, Grandpa. What's this World Wide Web business? We only know about the Snapchats and the Yik Yaks and the Instas and so on. Well, what if I told you that this very same World Wide Web powers your beloved Snapchats and your Instas? It's not just something for old people, like people in their 30s. Gross. So, let's talk a little about how this so-called World Wide Web works. And pretty soon, you'll be as hip as this guy with his stack of CDRs and his Palm Pilot that he thought would be cooler a lot longer than it was. But he also thought he'd have hair a lot longer than he did. So anyway, maybe don't listen to him. Or maybe do listen to him because he's your teacher. That's me. Oh my gosh, what do you know? Anyway, so when you visit a website, you type a URL into your search bar, right? And it makes a request. That request goes to that big fat cloud we call the internet, specifically a little corner of that internet called the World Wide Web, where it eventually reaches a server or a cluster of servers or something along those lines where who knows what happens. Maybe it just finds a file with the same name as the URL you requested, and it pulls up that file. Maybe it runs a full-blown back-end application in Python or Ruby or .NET or Java or some other back-end language. Doesn't matter. The point is, whatever it does up there in that cloud, it eventually comes back with a response. Now, that response could be anything. It could be a zip file. It could be an error page. But it's probably one of those three things: HTML, CSS, or JavaScript. So again, send a request. Hit a server. Who knows what happens on the server? But sooner or later, it comes up with some stuff to send back to us. Now, that could just be a file it pulled up, or it could be the output of running a program. But it's probably going to be HTML, CSS, or JavaScript, or cat pictures. But that's pretty much all that your web browser understands. It could be video or audio or something, but if your web page auto-plays that crap, then you're basically as bad as Spock here, who summons the actual devil, which is pretty much the same thing as auto-playing audio on your web page. So don't do it. But it's probably HTML, CSS, JavaScript, or Little Bub, and only one of those things is a programming language. No, not Little Bub. It's JavaScript, your new best friend. I know we just said documentation is your new best friend, but you're going to make lots of new best friends. You're not going to be able to decide. So front-end development is building all the stuff that gets sent in the response, chiefly HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, one of which is a programming language, and that is JavaScript. So, you want to learn more about JavaScript? Why? I have it on good authority that JavaScript totally sucks. Look at this. 35.5 million results for JavaScript sucks. And look at Casey down here. Self-described master programmer. Why do so many people seem to hate JavaScript? Because it sucks. Silly question, right? Sucks so much that there are 35 million pages devoted to its suckitude. So why use it? Reason number one, you don't really have a choice. It's the only programming language that works in the browsers. The only thing that these customers understand. So if you want to do front-end programming for the web, it's pretty much still the only game in town. Yes, you could use TypeScript or CoffeeScript or Dart or Elm or something, but only because they eventually get turned into JavaScript. So you should probably know how the JavaScript works if you want to ever troubleshoot those things. Reason number two, it's actually pretty good now. JavaScript has come a long way in the last few years. A lot of those Google results, well, some of them at least, were actually folks mocking people who say that JavaScript sucks because they just say that because they don't really know it yet. It's true that a lot of programmers still despise it, but in many cases, it really is because they don't take the time to actually learn it. There were some unfortunate decisions made very early in JavaScript's life that we still have to live with. And it certainly says something that one of the most popular books in the JavaScript world is JavaScript: The Good Parts, and it's not very long. But a lot of people just don't like JavaScript because it doesn't behave like the languages they're used to. For example, JavaScript is a curly braces and semicolons language. We've got C over there on the left. We've got, it's not C++. Well, whatever. Anyway, and Java, and it kind of looks like those, but it doesn't actually work like those. And if you've been writing JavaScript as long as I have, then you remember a time when it was truly miserable to work with. This is my business partner. That was his first tweet. A couple of years ago, Twitter released a tool for you to look up your first tweet easily. And this was the first. He created a Twitter account so that he could talk about how much he hated JavaScript. But that was 10 years ago when hating JavaScript was still, frankly, pretty reasonable. And I think even he would admit that he hated it in no small part because it wasn't Ruby, which was his favorite programming language. So anyway, now that we've established how terrible it is, who still wants to learn JavaScript? Yeah, it'll be fine. Come with me on a magical journey to 1989. The Berlin Wall came down. Nintendo released the Game Boy. Nintendo sticker, I like it. Nintendo released the Game Boy. Batman and Indiana Jones ruled the box office. Harrison, and that was the last Indiana Jones movie they ever made. Yes, it was. And I still had hair. And at the CERN Particle Physics Laboratory, future home of the Large Hadron Collider, this fella created the World Wide Web, and with it the HTTP protocol and HTML. He created it for sharing scientific documents in hypertext, the HT in HTML. Who knows what hypertext is? It allows documents to link to one another, and that's still fundamentally what the web is, only those linked documents can contain a lot more than just text. But in the beginning, there was only hypertext. So 89, fast forward to 1991, when they made the last Terminator movie that anyone ever made. And I still had hair. Anybody tell what game I'm playing? In my hot pink Rude Dog shirt?
You're on the NES. I can't see the,
Yes, indeed. Right there, upper right.
upper right.
Yeah. Let me see. No, good guess. Good guess. Give you a little hint. Do 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 ba doodle you do 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 a beedle bum boom ba doo ba doodle you bum 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 ba dum bum bum bum. No. Super Mario Brothers 3. See the little P meter there? That's right. Tanukis, flying, Hammer Brothers suits, the whole thing. Good. Do good. Anyway, Super Mario Bros. 3, good for your health. But anyway, in 1991, good old Tim, our old friend Tim Berners-Lee, inventor of the World Wide Web, made his creation available to the world with a humble newsgroup post. He launched it with a line mode browser that ran on pretty much anything, as well as a browser with a graphical interface and a built-in WYSIWYG editor. Anybody know what WYSIWYG means? Anybody? WYSIWYG? What you see is what you get. In other words, as you edit the document, you can see how the document is actually going to appear. So that was built right into this first graphical browser that he built. He called that browser, creatively, World Wide Web, this time without the spaces. But he later renamed it to Nexus because that was confusing. And it was written in Objective-C and ran on Next workstations, the Next Step operating system, the brainchild of this turtleneck-wearing cusser who had been fired from Apple at that point. But turns out Next workstations are really, really expensive and not all that widely used. So, still, not very many people were using it. So, that brings us to 1992, when I suddenly had long blonde hair, and this guy told Tim he was thinking of writing a web browser for the X Window system, which would allow it to run on a lot more Unix machines. And Tim said, good idea. So, he made a new browser called... What is it? Viola! Yes! Which you've never heard of. That's okay. But Viola added exciting new features like tables, embedding web pages in other web pages, a scripting language to add interactivity to pages, a syntax for style sheets, not the CSS we know, but style sheets nonetheless. All in all, a huge leap forward, but it still only ran on Unix. So it still didn't quite catch on. That brings us to 1993, by which time I had become the single most awkward organism on the planet. And at the Legal Information Institute at Cornell, they had made the first website about law. And lawyers were like, it's a Unix system. I know this. No, they weren't. They were like, Unix, lol, what? And this guy was like, JK, I made a browser for Windows. And the lawyers were like, hype. And this new web browser was called Cello! Cello, that's right. Yes, get it? Viola, Cello. Haha. Yes, Cello was the first web browser for Windows 3.1. This changed everything. Hey, web browsers, step forward if anybody remembers you. Not so fast, Cello. That's right, because at the National Center for Supercomputing Applications at the University of Illinois, birthplace of HAL 9000 in fiction, but in real life, that's where these two were students at the time, and they developed a web browser called what? Anybody? Mosaic! Hey, that's actually a relevant web browser. Mosaic was a legitimately big deal. Like Viola, it was a graphical browser for Unix. Unlike Viola, it was very quickly ported to Mac and Windows. And it was relatively easy to install and use. And that was a huge deal because software was a nightmare to install in those days, especially stuff that used a network. There were more people interested in using the web than ever before, so the ease of use of Mosaic was a really big deal. In some respects, the evolution of the web actually took a few steps back with Mosaic, because whereas something like Viola and Cello added features in a way that kind of kept presentation and behavior separate from structure, Mosaic just added a bunch of new proprietary tags like center, BR for line break, B for bold, U for underline, HR for horizontal rule, IMG, stuff like that. Just in time for 1994, when my nerdy friends and I still had hair. Those other three jerks still do. It's not fair. There's no justice in this world. And the information superhighway was all over the news. I know, because Anderson Cooper told us all about it on Channel 1 News in high school. And it was time for people to start figuring out how to make money with it. Heck yeah. So remember the NCSA where Mosaic was developed? Well, the University of Illinois has a for-profit spin-off called Spyglass, which exists to make money from inventions from the University of Illinois. So they began working on a commercial version of Mosaic. At the same time, however, Mosaic's original author started a company taking most of the original Mosaic team with him. He called it Mosaic Communications, until the NCSA called and was like, the name's ours, buddy. So they gave their new version a code name, suggesting that their browser would be the Mosaic Killer. The Mosaic Killer. The Mosaic Killer. The Mozilla. Oh my gosh, that's right. Mozilla became the code name and mascot for this new exciting browser. Yes, I've actually heard of that one. Yes, Mark and his friends adopted Mozilla as the mascot, but the browser itself ended up being called, not yet, Netscape. Anybody? Netscape? Yeah. Netscape Navigator was released in October of 94, implementing a ton of new features and very quickly rendering all other browsers irrelevant. So irrelevant that developers started inspecting the user agent string that gets sent with a request to make sure that it was Mozilla, aka Netscape. So all web browsers send a little string in that request. Remember the little arrow, the request that goes to the server? So in addition to saying what URL you're requesting, there's a bunch of other data in there. Among other things, the user agent string that identifies the browser that you're using. And this is a horrible idea, but people would actually configure their servers to look for that string and make sure it said Mozilla, and they wouldn't even send the response back. By golly, if they have a client that doesn't work with your code, that's not your job to figure out on the server side. You should write your anyway. Detect features, not browsers, because browsers change. This was very short-sighted, which we will talk about here in a second. But Mozilla is how Netscape 1 identified itself. This was Netscape 1.0 right here. Spyglass, meanwhile, the University of Illinois, was licensing their commercial version of Mosaic to whom? No, not Paul Rudd. Microsoft. That's right. AUKUS. Player 3 has entered the game. That's right, Microsoft. So Microsoft put a team of 6 to work enhancing Spyglass Mosaic and giving it that Microsoft flavor, which brings us to 1995 when my hair reached its maximum strength. And I don't know. It looks like I did a cover shoot for Young Republicans Quarterly or something that I don't remember. I don't know what was up with that look. Didn't last long. 1995, Turtleneck Guy's other company made a movie about toys. Alanis Morissette was ticked off about one thing or another. Bill Gates was master of the universe, says right there on Time Magazine. And anyway, Bill and his pals at Microsoft were ready to show off their fork of Mosaic to the world. You know it as a miserable pile of garbage called Internet Explorer, available in the Microsoft Plus companion for Windows 95. Now, IE at this point was pretty much just Mosaic dressed up with a Windows 95 coat of paint at that point. But the Netscape folks had been busy adding loads of new features. Internet Explorer didn't even support tables in the first release. They didn't even have that blue E icon yet. They just labeled it the Internet. And seriously, forget what you know about recent versions like IE11 or Edge or anything like that. The first 2 releases of IE had no redeeming qualities. But everyone just used the browser that was on the floppy that their ISP provided, which was virtually always Netscape anyway. In fact, this is how Internet Explorer identified itself. Microsoft's user agent string reported itself as Mozilla with the truth in parentheses, so it wouldn't get ignored when folks were sniffing the user agent string. And guess what? Everybody still does that. Chrome, Safari, everybody. They all call themselves Mozilla with stuff in parentheses. So if you're sniffing for anything, it's not going to work because they all put freaking everything inside those parentheses now. Apple WebKit, if you're looking for that, it'll say it is. Sure. KHTML, if you're looking for that, it'll say it is. Gecko, that's how Firefox identifies itself. So if you're looking for that, you're going to find that string in there. Chrome, sure. Safari, why not? Edge, yeah. Anybody have a guess what this actually is? It's Edge. This is how Edge identifies itself as everything, but they all do that. It's ridiculous. So I know you were promised JavaScript. We're getting there. Just bear with me. So we're in 1995, right? When Generation X was the absolute worst instead of you. Don't worry, they've always been doing this. Are movies and music killing America's soul? 20-something, laid back, late blooming, or just lost? Yeah, they've always said that the kids were terrible. So don't feel bad. They did it to us too. 1995. Well, that was the year that the web became widely available to mere mortals, and the commercial web was suddenly a very real thing. Amazon and Yahoo first appeared. CNET launched with a yellow sidebar that every other site on the web decided they needed to copy. Seriously, you can't imagine how influential that stupid yellow sidebar was. They were even making movies in 1995 about hackers. Boot up or shut up. Online this fall. That's right. The executives just thought they really had their finger on the pulse, knew how to appeal to the youth. Use words like online. How about we say it's online this fall? It'll totally work. Yeah, anyway. The web was everywhere is the point. And there were new tricks like tiled background images and GIFs, which were clearly a fad and have no place on today's internet. But web monkeys wanted to add interactivity beyond mere hyperlinks. The answer came in the form of plugins like Java Applets, QuickTime VR, and Macromedia Shockwave. Incredibly, Shockwave is still maintained by Adobe. And even more incredibly, the Space Jam website is still online. So we had interactive content, even games, right in web browsers. But interactivity via browser plugins was still a pretty poor experience. The plugins had to be installed. They were a security risk. They were painfully slow. And they couldn't actually interact with any HTML elements on the page. They were kind of their own separate thing. Luckily, a team of scientists at Netscape were hard at work on a scripting language that would run directly in the browser. Okay, they weren't scientists, and they weren't a team. It was one guy, and he spent 10 days on it. What was it? You guessed. Mocha! That's what his boss, this guy again, told him to call it. He really, really wanted to remind people of that other new technology that was named after coffee. But a few months later, before they'd actually released it to the public, they came up with a better name. And we finally had LiveScript. Okay, that name didn't stick either. In December, when they actually released the scripting language, Netscape worked out a deal with Sun Microsystems, who had created the trendiest new platform in town, Java. And thanks to this trademark licensing agreement, which confuses people to this day, Netscape could call their new language JavaScript. That's right, JavaScript. Despite having only the most superficial of similarities to Java. In any case, JavaScript now existed and could be used far and wide, as long as you had the very latest version of Netscape and you had JavaScript turned on. But at least it was there. Pardon me. But JavaScript had arrived, and because the name JavaScript wasn't confusing enough, when Microsoft inevitably reverse engineered it for Internet Explorer, they called it JScript. With me so far? We got JavaScript and JScript. So over the next year or so, an organization called ECMA, that's the European Country Music Association. No, just kidding. It's the European Chamber Music Academy. No, not that, ECMA. It's the European Cylinder Makers Association. No, I'm just kidding. It's Étude de conception de machine automatique. No? Okay, this joke has run its course. Obviously, it's the Electronic Collar Manufacturers Association. All right. It's the East Coast Music Association. Canadian music, East Coast style. That's what I'm talking about. Okay, fine. ECMA International, a standards body, stands for European Computer Manufacturers Association. And over the next couple of years, they worked on standardizing JavaScript. And they called it ECMAScript. So, for the last 20 years, ECMAScript has been the official standard of which JavaScript is the primary implementation. So when we talk about the standard, it's ECMAScript. When we talk about the language, it's JavaScript. So now that we've got our name straight, what could JavaScript in those days actually do? Well, HTML could define the structure of a page and its basic presentation. JavaScript could make actual stuff happen. It could define behavior. For example, you could do things when you moved your mouse cursor over something. You could actually do mouse over events. So in this case, you could have completely inscrutable links on the side, and you wouldn't tell what they did until you moved your mouse over them. Who knows what the heck is that third one up from the bottom? I don't know what any of these are. They're land application, digester cleaning, lagoon cleaning, etc., but who knows which one's which? You have to move your mouse over them. So, JavaScript really helped usability, right? It kind of tempted people to do stuff like this and make things a little less usable. But by golly, it was neat. This website is no longer online. I found it buried on an external hard drive, despite the fact that no one I know would have built such an atrocity in the late 90s. If you're a bank with a ridiculous skeuomorphic website design that looks like an ATM, then you could do things like put a calculator on the page, maybe even a mortgage calculator. Pretty cool. Behavior, JavaScript. Wow. So besides calculators and the ever-popular mouse over images, you could do stuff like form validation. So you could intercept form submissions before they actually made it back to the server and maybe tell people, hey, you screwed it up, you left this blank, you shouldn't have left it blank. Now, client-side validation is no substitute. It's not sufficient. Never trust user data. Always check on the server too. But anyway, client-side validation was a really great thing we could do with JavaScript. But as with any new technology, there were those who would use it for evil. Yes, with JavaScript, the pop-up ad was born. Gee, thanks, JavaScript. Yes, everything was terrible. The web was becoming a nightmare, not just because of pop-up ads, but because an increasingly large number of sites only worked in one browser on one platform. Because you see, in those days, Netscape and Internet Explorer didn't just compete on user interface features and stuff like that. They each added their own non-standard HTML elements and other features. IE had Marquee. Netscape had Blink. Both were terrible. Our lives were enriched. Competition had fostered such innovation. No, it was terrible. The browser war was a nightmare. Both had significant market share and developed wildly different object models. So if you did use JavaScript to try to manipulate things on the page, Internet Explorer had document.all, Netscape had document.layers. Neither one was standard. So if a site did anything so much as add a pull-down menu or something, it had to be written twice. Welcome to the first browser war. If you were really cool, you put little buttons on your site to let people know which browser they should download. Aside from different APIs for JavaScript, each browser had major features that were just plain absent in the other. Microsoft Internet Explorer 4.0 was bundled with Windows and quickly became the single most widely used browser. And there was a whole antitrust thing. But anyway, at least Spyglass was getting paid, right? Since it was based on their code? Haha! JK, LOL. Since Microsoft bundled it with Windows for free, they didn't pay a dime to Spyglass. Yeah, they got sued and settled for a measly $8 million. But anyway, Internet Explorer began to dominate, and it introduced its own features, such as ActiveX, which allowed native compiled Windows code to be included in web pages. This obviously opened up a lot of possibilities as long as you were willing to ignore every non-Windows user, which a lot of businesses were perfectly willing to do. The web was starting to become just another delivery mechanism for Windows code. And thanks to the fact that Outlook Express was also included in every copy of Windows, and it used the IE engine to display messages, email could run native code. What could go wrong? Lots of crap went wrong, and computer worms did billions of dollars in damage. And sometimes just previewing a message was enough to wreck everything. What were we talking about again? Oh yeah, ActiveX. So why did companies use it? Since it was catastrophically insecure and it broke the web for so many users. Well, it did offer some enticing behavior, including one really neat thing that did eventually catch on, albeit in a pure JavaScript form. XML HTTP request, often shortened to XHR. That made its debut in Outlook Web Access with Exchange Server 2000. And it allowed a web page to get more information from the server after the initial page load without refreshing the entire page. And that was a huge step forward. And despite the name, data was not limited to XML. It really had nothing to do with XML. It was just a catchy name. It was a mechanism for asynchronous requests. You may have heard of it by a different name. In 2005, Jesse James Garrett of Adaptive Path wrote a blog post describing a model for developing applications with XHR. And he called it, anybody know? Ajax! In those days, we still had to deal with wildly different syntax for this and even basic operations that dealt with the contents of a page. Using JavaScript in combination with with HTML and CSS in those days, for a time, was called DHTML. And there were libraries that managed to work on all the major browsers at the time. Then, as now, supporting earlier versions of Internet Explorer was the hardest. But Microsoft was finally talking about adopting standards, but old versions hung around for a painfully long time. And Netscape usage had thankfully dipped below 0.5%. And Firefox, Netscape's successor, was designed from scratch to implement standards, and it was becoming rapidly much more popular. Still, those DHTML libraries were nasty to use and painful to download as they were enormous. So every visitor to your site had to download this enormous library just to rewrite all of your code so that it worked in the browser you were using. These were the bad old days. But 2006 brought several new JavaScript libraries that were a little leaner and handled cross-platform compatibility in a much more pleasant way, even features like Ajax. Now these days, there are new challenges on the scene, and they all do their best to implement standards and even keep themselves up to date. They even have nice built-in tools for developing JavaScript, as we will see. HTML5 offers new APIs that we can access with JavaScript to do some new things, as well as to do some old things faster. And JavaScript itself got a major overhaul with ECMAScript 2015, aka ES6, and it has continued to improve since then. And we're not going to mess with ES5 and earlier. We're going to be using ES6 from the get-go. Thank me later. So we have about 1 million libraries and full-blown frameworks that let us build fancy JavaScript apps. We're going to be using React. That's the third one. The one that looks like an atomic thingy. Still, old versions of Internet Explorer remain the hardest for front-end developers to deal with, and there's still a shocking number of computers running Windows XP. Internet Explorer 8, which was released 8 years ago, was the last version to even support XP. And those who never updated past Windows XP SP1, like one of my clients, are stuck with IE7. IE eventually earned a bad enough rap that Microsoft dropped the name and now calls their browser Edge, of course. But all the modern browsers are pretty okay for our purposes. I'm going to recommend Chrome for class because I am the most familiar with its developer tools. So I strongly encourage you to use it because the developer tools are wonderful and they're going to make life much easier. And if you ask a question, say things don't work and your developer tools aren't open, we're going to be very sad. Yes, sir.
I just want to know, is there a difference between Chrome and Chromium for development?
I assume the same developer tools are built into Chromium. That's probably fine. So yeah, probably not. It's just a UI thing, right? So any of the things we build in class ought to work on any of the big four browsers, but use Chrome so you can use the developer tools. Firefox has fantastic developer tools too. I'm just not as familiar with them, so I won't be teaching them. So no one can say for sure what the future holds, but the future of front-end development looks pretty bright indeed. So it's taken a while to get here, but it's a pretty exciting time to be creating things for the web. And JavaScript has never been better. Are you with me? Get psyched! Woo! All right.